We tend to think of history as a solid mass of facts, carved into the granite of textbooks. But what if I told you that this granite is simply compressed dust of misconceptions? What if the most unwavering truths you've known since childhood are, in fact, the greatest fabrications created by the genius of propaganda, poets, or born from fear and ignorance? In this series of stories, we won't retell what you already know. Instead, we'll embark on a journey beyond reality, where truth reveals itself as so bizarre, terrifying, and captivating that any fiction pales in comparison. Myth number 1. The Kingdom of Titans built on lies. Close your eyes. Picture a prehistoric world. What do you see? Most likely, it's a scene painted by Hollywood and popular books. The earth trembles under the weighty footsteps of giants. Diplodocuses, like living mountains, stretch their necks toward the tops of ancient ferns. And lurking in the jungle's shadows, with rows of dagger-like teeth, is the Tyrannosaurus rex, the ultimate monarch of terror, covered in rough, armor-like scales, much like a crocodile. This image has been etched into our minds since childhood. The world of dinosaurs is one of colossal, slow-moving, cold-blooded reptiles, a world of primal power and blind fury. For centuries, paleontologists digging up gigantic bones only strengthened this belief. Each new discovery seemed to add another stroke to this epic painting. Here's a skull the size of a car, and there's a vertebra too heavy to lift with two people. Museums around the globe filled with colossal skeletons, and humanity gazed at them in awe, convinced that yes, the past belonged to giants. No one dared to question it, because bones don't lie. They were enormous, which meant their world must have been the same. This idea was too tempting, too magnificent to be a lie. It became an axiom, an unbreakable foundation of our understanding of the dawn of life on Earth. But one day, in the silence of laboratories, under the light of microscopes, the truth began to seep through the fossilized lies. The reality turned out to be far stranger and more astonishing. The great kingdom of Titans was not just a world of giants. It was filled with creatures of all sizes, many no larger than a modern chicken or dog. Imagine the Compsognathus, a nimble predator the size of a turkey darting through the underbrush, hunting lizards. Or the Microraptor, a tiny creature with 4 wings, gliding from tree to tree like a prehistoric flying squirrel. But the most astonishing discovery lay ahead. The very rough crocodilian scales we have grown so accustomed to seeing in reconstructions turned out to be a grand misconception. Paleontologists began to find fossils that forever changed the image of ancient reptiles. They were feathers. Not just rare hairs, but full-fledged, complex plumage. It turns out that many predatory dinosaurs, including the famous Velociraptor, which, by the way, was actually the size of a large poodle, not a human as shown in movies, were covered in feathers. They could be as bright as tropical birds, serving purposes like camouflage, mating displays, or even warmth. Suddenly, the world of dinosaurs transformed from a dull green realm of scaly monsters to a vibrant, noisy aviary of both giant and tiny sizes. The truth is, dinosaurs didn't completely go extinct. One branch survived, evolved, and lives among us today. That branch is birds. Every time you see a sparrow or a pigeon, you're looking at a direct descendant of those terrible lizards. The myth of giant, scaly monsters has proven to be more enduring than the truth because it's simpler, more dramatic, and fits our expectations of a lost world better. However, the reality of fierce, feathered predators the size of chickens running on land while their winged relatives soared in the sky is far more fantastic and complex. We have gazed so long at the giants that we overlooked a whole world teeming at their feet, a world that became the true heir of the planet. Moving from the grandeur of these ancient creatures, big and small, let's turn to the grace of the tiniest ruler of the skies, whose uniqueness has, it turns out, also been greatly exaggerated. Myth number 2. The emerald hummingbird and its stolen glory. In the animal kingdom, there are beings that seem like a marvel of nature's engineering. One such creature is the hummingbird. This tiny bundle of shimmering energy, hovering in the air with the hum of invisible wings, has always been a symbol of uniqueness. In books, documentaries, and lectures by naturalists, one mantra has persisted for decades. Hummingbirds are the only birds capable of flying backward. This ability has turned them into living legends, absolute aces of aerial acrobatics. Picture this flight. The hummingbird approaches a flower, hovers like a little helicopter, sips nectar with its long, needle-like beak, and then, without turning around, gracefully flies backward to either make way or evade danger. This maneuverability, this complete control of space, seemed like an exclusive gift, the pinnacle of avian evolution. The whole world believed it because it was beautiful and logical. Such a miniature and speedy bird had to possess something that larger, clumsier birds lacked. Its ability to fly backward became its calling card, its crown jewel. Scientists detailed the unique structure of its wings and shoulder joint, allowing it to beat its wings up to 80 times a second and move in any direction. The myth became so entrenched that it became synonymous with the very bird itself. To say hummingbird was to say, the one that flies backward. Yet here, in this cozy and widely accepted fact, lies a subtle but important distortion of the truth. While hummingbirds are certainly the unmatched masters of backward flight, performing the feat with ease, duration, and incredible precision, are they the only ones? No. Nature's archivists, armed with high-speed cameras and boundless patience, have discovered that other birds possess this secret skill as well, even if not as skillfully. Take a look at the swift. This bird, resembling a flying boomerang, spends nearly its entire life in the air. Also in its toolkit is a brief backward flight, a quick maneuver to adjust its position in the nest or push off from a rock. Some species of kingfishers, swift fish hunters, can make short backward moves, darting away from the water's surface after a failed dive. The secret is that for them, this is not a primary mode of movement, but rather a situational trick, while for hummingbirds, it's part of their daily routine, a vital skill. The truth lies not in absolute uniqueness, but in the degree of perfection. Hummingbirds are not the only pilots who can fly backward, but they are the only aces who have perfected this skill to an absolute degree. The myth arose from our desire to see clear boundaries and absolute champions in nature. It's easier for us to believe there's a one and only than to acknowledge that nature is a spectrum of abilities, where some excel in certain skills while others only occasionally show similar talents. The glory of the hummingbird was not stolen, it was simply shared with other, less noticeable masters of the sky, and this truth does not diminish its greatness. We often mistakenly elevate some while demonizing others. From our exaggerated admiration of the heavenly acrobat, let's descend to the earthly realm, where we encounter a being unjustly accused for centuries of one of the most heinous crimes against humanity. Myth number 3, the Black Death and the innocent accused. Imagine a medieval city cloaked in gloom and fear, narrow streets filled with filth, the air thick with the stench of decay and despair. The creaking of a cart collecting bodies, and the monotonous toll of a bell counting down the last hours of civilization. This is the era of the Black Death, the great plague that wiped out nearly half of Europe. And at the center of this apocalypse stood one main accused, the rat. With its beady black eyes scurrying in the darkness of cellars and sewers, it became the perfect scapegoat. The image of the rat carrying disease on its fur became so canonical that it found its way into every history book. We were told a simple, straightforward story. Mongol hordes brought the plague, rats on trading ships spread it across Europe, and fleas living on rats bit people, infecting them. This story was logical and terrifying, providing a clear enemy. All the hate and fear of the unseen death could be directed at this small, squeaking creature. The rat was cursed, hunted down, and depicted in engravings as the devil's accomplice. For centuries, it bore the stigma of being the chief culprit behind the greatest pandemic in human history. Millions believed this without a shadow of doubt because it explained the unexplainable and gave an illusion of control. Kill the rat, and you will be safe. But the archives hold a different, much darker truth. Of course, rats and their fleas played a part in the spread of the plague. They were the original reservoir of the disease, the Trojan horse that arrived in Europe. However, they could never account for the lightning-fast, all-consuming scale of the disaster. The speed at which the Black Death swept through towns and countries was far too rapid for the slow rat route. The real nightmare was that the main carriers of the disease were much closer and far less noticeable. Modern studies, based on historical data analysis and mathematical modeling, point to a different culprit: human lice and human fleas. Unlike the rat flea, which prefers its rodent host and bites humans only out of desperation, these human parasites live and breed directly on people and in their clothing. In the unsanitary conditions of the Middle Ages, where people lived in close quarters, rarely washed, and wore the same clothes for weeks, these parasites were everywhere. Once the plague hit the human population, it started spreading not from rats to humans, but from person to person through their own personal parasites. This was no longer a zoonotic infection, but a human epidemic in the most horrifying sense of the word. The truth turned out to be much scarier than the myth. The enemy was not lurking in the cellar, but on one's own body. The monster was not hiding in the shadows, but in the folds of clothing. The rat was merely a spark, while the fire was fanned by humans and their tiny, unnoticed companions. The myth of the killer rat was convenient, allowing people to separate themselves from the source of infection. However, reality blurred this boundary, turning every individual into a potential threat to another. We mistakenly blamed one animal, but what if we are fundamentally wrong about an entire class of creatures, confusing them with others and attributing foreign traits to them? Myth number 4. The web of misunderstanding about 8 legs. Ask any child, or even many adults, what a spider is, and you are likely to hear a confident answer: it's a scary insect. This response seems natural, almost instinctive. Spiders are small, they have many legs, they crawl and spin webs. They fit perfectly into our everyday understanding of the insect world. In fairy tales, cartoons, and even some old encyclopedias, they are often grouped with flies, beetles, and mosquitoes. We have become accustomed to lumping all this creepy crawlies into one big, not-so-pleasant category. This belief is deeply rooted in language and culture. We say to get rid of pests, meaning cockroaches and spiders alike. This misconception has been passed down through generations as something taken for granted. No one questions why that is, as the superficial similarity seems like sufficient proof. The spider has become an insect by default, through a folk definition that is proven to be stronger than strict scientific classification. This is a case where everyday logic has triumphed over biology in the minds of millions of people, and this victory has lasted for centuries, creating confusion that seems harmless but actually distorts our understanding of the tree of life. However, if we take a look into the archives of nature, we will see that the spider is a pretender in the realm of insects. In fact, it belongs to a completely different class, arachnids. The difference between them is fundamental, much like the distinction between a fish and a dolphin. It's simple to learn how to count. Every insect, whether it's an ant or a butterfly, has exactly 6 legs. A spider always has 8. The body of an insect is clearly divided into 3 parts: the head, thorax, and abdomen. A spider has only 2 parts, the cephalothorax and the abdomen. Most insects have antennae for sensing touch and smell. Spiders do not have these at all. Instead, they have chelicerae, mouthparts often equipped with venom glands, and pedipalps that resemble short legs near their mouth. Spiders are not just 8-legged insects. They represent a separate, ancient, and unique branch of evolution. Their closest relatives are not flies and bees, but scorpions, mites, and harvestmen. Calling a spider an insect is like calling a bat a bird simply because it can fly. This myth has proven to be remarkably resilient for a simple reason: the human mind loves to simplify. Rather than delving into the complexities of classification, we create broad categories based on external traits. Small, many-legged, crawls. Must be an insect. This mental trap works flawlessly. But the truth is, the world of living beings is far more complex and interesting. Understanding that a spider is not just a strange insect, but a representative of its own unique class opens a door to the fascinating world of arachnids, a world we are just beginning to truly understand. We are easily mistaken in how we classify animals, but we are even more prone to error when evaluating the actions of great individuals, attributing to them things they never did, and giving their names false interpretations. Myth number 5. The Great Deception Born from a Cut. There are names embedded in our culture so deeply that they have become synonymous. One of them is the name of Gaius Julius Caesar. This name is linked to one of the most well-known medical legends, still recounted even by doctors today. The legend states that the great general and dictator was born not through natural means, but via a surgical operation, an incision in his mother's abdomen. And it is in his honor that this procedure was called caesarean section. This story is so compelling, so symbolic. A great man who changed the course of history ought to have been born in an extraordinary way, defying the laws of nature. His entrance into the world was as bold and groundbreaking as his entire life. The name Caesar and the Latin word caedere, meaning to cut, sound so similar that the connection between them appears obvious. This myth has been passed down through the centuries, flourishing with details. Historians and writers have repeated it, and it has firmly entered medical terminology and public consciousness. The entire world believed that the birth of one man gave a name to a life-saving operation for millions of women. It was a beautiful and heroic story, a perfect example of how an individual leaves a mark not only in politics, but also in the very language of medicine. But as soon as you open the door of the archives, this grand narrative crumbles into dust. The truth is much more mundane and, at the same time, tragic. In ancient Rome, the procedure we call a caesarean section did exist. However, it was only performed in one extreme case, when the mother was dying or already dead. It was a posthumous procedure, an attempt to save at least the baby from the womb of a deceased mother. This was regulated by a special law, Lex Caesarea, which mandated that the fetus be removed before the woman was buried. Now here's the main fact that shatters the myth. Julius Caesar's mother, Aurelia Cotta, not only survived his birth but lived a long life as an influential and respected matron. She passed away when her son was already in his 40s and in Gaul. Thus, Caesar simply could not have been born through this operation, as it was only performed on the dead. So where did the name come from? The most likely theory suggests that it does not derive from a specific person's name, but rather from the Latin verb cadere, which means to cut. So, caesarean section simply translates to the section obtained by cutting. The connection to Caesar is a later folk interpretation, a beautiful etymological error that turned out to be more appealing than the dull linguistic truth. The myth persists because the story of a great man is always more interesting than the story behind a word's origin. We prefer to believe in heroic exceptions rather than mundane grammar. Thus, the great commander became an unwitting godfather of a procedure to which he had no relation. We easily associate the names of the great with fiction. Now, let's turn to another pair of geniuses whose relationship history has turned into a deadly feud that never actually existed. Myth number 6. A requiem for poison friendship. There are stories that seem eternal. One such story is the conflict between genius and villainy, talent and jealousy. The most classic example of this drama is the tale of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and Antonio Salieri. In our minds, largely thanks to Pushkin's genius and his little tragedy, and later to Rimsky-Korsakov's opera and the film Amadeus, these two names are inseparable. The picture is clear and dramatic. Mozart is the carefree, divine genius creating masterpieces with ease. Salieri is the hard-working yet talentless craftsman, the court composer consumed by bitter envy of his young rival's gift. According to the myth, this jealousy drives him to the ultimate act. He poisons Mozart's glass, cutting short the life of the greatest composer in history. This story has become a symbol of creative antagonism. It is recounted as a historical fact, a moral parable about how mediocrity always despises genius. The image of Salieri the poisoner has become so ingrained in culture that his name has become synonymous with envy. Millions of people around the world believe in this tragedy, empathizing with young Mozart and cursing the treacherous Italian. The legend is so strong because it explains Mozart's early and mysterious death through a simple and relatable human vice: jealousy. But the historical archives of 18th century Vienna tell a very different story, one devoid of Shakespearean passions. Mozart and Salieri were not deadly rivals. They were colleagues, competitors, and sometimes even partners. Yes, there was professional rivalry, just like among any two composers vying for recognition and commissions at the imperial court. But there was no animosity. Evidence of their collaboration remains. For instance, they co-wrote the cantata in honor of Ophelia for a particular singer. Salieri held Mozart's talent in high regard and even conducted performances of his works. When Mozart died at the age of 35, the official cause was listed as severe miasmic fever. Most likely, it was a flare-up of rheumatism or kidney failure, conditions he suffered from. Rumors of poisoning did circulate in Vienna, but only after his death, and they were merely conjecture. The myth of Salieri as the poisoner was inflated and canonized much later, during the Romantic era when demand grew for stories about misunderstood and doomed geniuses. Pushkin, while creating his brilliant work, relied on these rumors rather than on facts, crafting an artistic truth that turned out to be stronger than historical reality. In truth, Salieri was a respected and quite successful composer, a teacher to Beethoven, Schubert, and Liszt. Toward the end of his life, he did suffer from a mental disorder, and, according to some rumors, in delirium he confessed to the murder of Mozart. But these words cannot be taken as a credible admission. The truth is that instead of a dramatic tale of murder, we have a story about two talented individuals working in the same field, and instead of a treacherous villain, we find a gifted musician whose reputation was tarnished by a brilliant yet fictional literary plot. We love to dramatize the deaths of geniuses. But what if even the most canonical account of the death of another great figure is just one version rather than an unwavering fact? Myth number 7. The Last Breath of the Queen and the Hiss of the Myth. The story of the last queen of Egypt, Cleopatra, is a tapestry woven from power, love, and tragedy, and the most vivid, the most memorable knot in this tapestry is her finale. The image captured by Shakespeare, artists, and filmmakers is known to all. After her defeat in war and the suicide of her beloved Mark Antony, the proud queen, unwilling to be paraded in chains during Octavian's triumph in Rome, chooses to end her life. She has secretly brought a basket of figs, under which lies her death, a small, poisonous snake, an asp. Cleopatra, adorned in royal garments, presses the snake to her breast, and it delivers a fatal bite. This image, a combination of regal dignity, exotic danger, and almost mystical union with the symbol of Egypt, the snake, has become an icon. It is so dramatic and symbolic that it seems the only possible ending for such a woman. Millions accept this version as gospel truth. We have seen it in movies starring Elizabeth Taylor and read about it in books. Asp and Cleopatra have become inseparable in our minds. Belief in this version has been upheld for centuries because it perfectly completes the legend of the Queen of the Nile. She left this world not as a captive, but as a goddess, choosing her own regal way to die. However, if we turn to the original sources, to the writings of ancient historians like Plutarch or Dio Cassius, the picture becomes much more murky and ambiguous. Yes, the version involving the snake was indeed the most popular, even in ancient times. Plutarch mentions that the asp could have been brought in a basket with figs or in a vessel of water. But he also adds that no one knows the truth. According to him, the body of the queen showed no signs of a bite, just some faint marks on her arm. He refers to other theories that were circulating at the time, for instance, that Cleopatra kept poison in a hollow hairpin and pricked herself with it. Another historian, Strabo, who lived during Cleopatra's time, was not even sure if it was a snake or some kind of poisonous ointment that she applied to herself. Modern experts in herpetology also expressed doubts. The venom of a cobra, the asp, would likely cause a painful death with convulsions and paralysis, rather than the peaceful fading that legends describe. Additionally, it would have been extremely difficult to bring a large and aggressive snake into a guarded chamber. A more plausible version seems to be that of a potent poison of plant or animal origin, which could have been ingested or injected into the bloodstream. The truth is, the exact manner of Cleopatra's demise remains one of history's greatest mysteries. We have no irrefutable evidence, only theories, and the snake theory triumphed over all others because it was the most cinematic, the most poetic. The myth proved stronger than the facts due to its artistic power. We chose the most beautiful legend and called it history. One ruler's mysterious death gave rise to a myth. But what about another great ruler whose death on a distant island still stirs the minds of conspiracy theorists? Myth number 8. The Island of Mists and Arsenic in the Emperor's Hair. The exile and death of Napoleon Bonaparte on the island of St. Helena marks the epilogue of one of the most grand stories in world politics. And, as with any great drama's epilogue, it is shrouded in mystery and suspicion. The official explanation, as recorded in the autopsy report conducted by his personal physician, Francesco Antomarchi, states that the emperor died of stomach cancer. However, this mundane cause of death has never satisfied those who saw Napoleon as a martyr. Soon after his passing in 1821, another, far more thrilling version began to gain momentum: that Napoleon was poisoned. And not by just anyone, but by his jailers, the English, who feared him even in captivity. This conspiracy theory has thrived and flourished for 2 centuries. It depicted a picture of a slow, insidious murder involving arsenic, which was allegedly mixed into the emperor's food or wine. Supporters of this theory pointed to the symptoms that Napoleon experienced before his death: abdominal pain, nausea, weakness, all of which could indicate chronic poisoning. The myth of the assassinated emperor was incredibly compelling. It transformed Napoleon from a victim of illness into a victim of political murder, the last fallen soldier in the war against all of Europe. It gave his death a heroic rather than tragic nuance. The climax of this theory came with studies conducted in the 20th century. Researchers gained access to strands of Napoleon's hair, which had been cut after his death and preserved as relics. Chemical analysis revealed shocking results. The arsenic content in the hair was dozens of times higher than normal. This seemed to be irrefutable evidence. Newspaper headlines worldwide proclaimed, "Napoleon was poisoned." The conspiracy theory appeared to have turned into a proven fact. However, further, more in-depth research of archives and scientific discoveries put this elegant theory into question. Firstly, stomach cancer was a hereditary illness in the Bonaparte family. His father also died from it. The symptoms he experienced perfectly fit the clinical picture of this disease. Secondly, and most importantly, there was an explanation for the high arsenic levels. It turned out that arsenic was everywhere in the 19th century. It was used in medicine, in rat poison, and most importantly for this story, in dyes. A pigment known as Paris green, which contained copper arsenite, was particularly popular. This bright green dye was used to cover wallpapers in wealthy homes, including Longwood House on St. Helena Island, where Napoleon lived. In the humid climate of the island, mold, which grew on the wallpaper, could react with the dye, releasing poisonous arsenic vapors into the air. Thus, the emperor could indeed have been subjected to chronic poisoning, but it was not a targeted murder. It was a case of household poisoning that many suffered from at that time. The truth was more complicated and ironic. The greatest general of Europe was possibly being slowly harmed by his own wallpapers. The myth of poisoning persisted because it suggested an enemy and intent, while reality pointed to a banal and impersonal danger from the environment. We often seek malice where blind chance or ignorance is at play. Similarly, we attribute incredible properties to man-made objects, seeing them where they actually do not exist. Myth number 9. The Great Wall, invisible from space. There are images that have become symbols of human achievement. One of the most powerful is the Great Wall of China, winding through mountain ridges like a stone dragon. And with this wonder of the world is tied one of the most widespread and beautiful myths, that it is the only man-made structure visible from space with the naked eye. This idea captures the imagination. It transforms the wall from a mere defensive structure into something of planetary scale, a scar on the face of the earth, visible even from the heavens. This myth has been repeated in schools, published in magazines, and featured in documentaries. It has become an almost official fun fact about the wall. The belief in it was so strong because it flattered human pride. We, humans, are capable of creating something so grand that it can be seen from the depths of space. It stands as a testament to our power, our ability to transform the face of the planet. The first astronauts who went into orbit became unwittingly trapped by this myth. Everyone expected them to confirm it. And the myth continued to thrive, gathering new evidence and retellings. However, when the astronauts returned to Earth and began sharing their real impressions, the beautiful legend began to crack. One by one, they debunked the myth. It turned out that from low Earth orbit, the Great Wall of China is nearly impossible to see. Why? It's all about its width and color. The wall, despite its colossal length, is extremely narrow, averaging only 6 to 7 meters wide. From hundreds of kilometers up, it appears thinner than a human hair. Moreover, it is built from stone and clay, which blend in with the surrounding landscape, the mountains, and the soil. Astronauts reported that other objects are much more visible from space. The lights of cities at night form entire glowing webs, major highways, especially in desert areas, airstrips with their long runways, and gigantic dams and reservoirs. Even individual ships in the ocean can sometimes be spotted by their wake, but not the wall. Chinese astronaut Yang Liwei, the first astronaut from China, officially stated that he could not see the wall from his orbit. The truth is that the myth of the wall's visibility from space was born long before actual space flights, back in the 18th century, as a speculative notion of its grandeur. And this idea was so appealing that it survived even the reality check. People wanted to believe it, and they continued to do so, even in the face of eyewitness accounts. It's the perfect example of how wishful thinking can be mistaken for reality on a global scale. We create myths about great structures, even without knowing their true names, much like the most famous amphitheater in the world. Myth number 10. The Flavian Amphitheater and the Shadow of a Giant. When we say Rome, what image first comes to mind? Certainly the Colosseum. Its majestic ruins outlined against the Italian sky have become a symbol not only of the city, but of the entire Roman Empire. Millions of tourists flock to its walls every year. Photographers take countless pictures, and every guidebook proudly displays its name, the Colosseum. We have become so accustomed to this name that it feels like it has always existed. As if the Romans themselves, sitting in its stands and watching gladiator fights, shouted, "We are at the Colosseum!" This name has become synonymous with the building, an inseparable part of it. It sounds powerful and majestic, fitting for such a grand structure. The whole world knows this building as the Colosseum, and no one doubts that this is its original, true name given at birth. This belief seems as solid as the stones that make up the amphitheater. However, if we delve into ancient Roman records, we won't find a single mention of the word Colosseum in relation to this building. The truth is, the Romans never called it that. Its official and only name at that time was the Flavian Amphitheater. Why Flavian? Because its construction was begun by Emperor Vespasian and completed by his sons Titus and Domitian, who were members of the Flavian dynasty. For any inhabitant of ancient Rome, it was simply the amphitheater, the largest and most important one in the city. So, where did the name Colosseum come from? It appeared much later, during the early Middle Ages, and its origin is linked not to the building itself, but to its neighbor. Next to the amphitheater once stood a gigantic bronze statue over 30 meters high, known as the Colossus of Nero. Originally, it was a portrait of Emperor Nero himself in the guise of the sun god. After his downfall, the statue was modified to remove his features, but it continued to stand in its place for several centuries. Locals, when referring to the amphitheater, began to orient themselves by this grand monument, calling it the Amphitheater by the Colossus, Amphitheatrum ad Colosseum. Over time, the statue was destroyed, most likely during an earthquake, or melted down. Yet its nickname stuck to the amphitheater. The lengthy name was shortened, and the Flavian Amphitheater transformed into the Colosseum. The myth that this was its original name became so deeply rooted because the new name turned out to be incredibly fitting. The word Colosseum comes from colossal, huge, which perfectly describes the structure itself. The new label suited the building so well that everyone forgot the old one. Thus, the shadow of a long-gone giant bestowed a new, eternal name upon the greatest amphitheater in the world. Names and reputations change over time. Even the symbols of entire cities may not be what they seem, as is the case with Paris's main attraction. Myth number 11. The Iron Lady and her unnoticed rival. Paris. The city of love, art, and the Eiffel Tower. This lace-like metal structure reaching for the sky has become not just a symbol of Paris, but of all France. For decades, it has been the absolute height dominator of the city. In the minds of millions of people around the world, it remains so to this day. Ask anyone, what is the tallest structure in Paris? And 99 out of 100 will confidently answer, the Eiffel Tower. This fact seems as obvious and solid as the tower itself. It is the queen of the Parisian sky. It can be seen from almost any point in the city, and its image adorns countless souvenirs. It has become a benchmark for height, a reference point. The belief in its primacy is supported by history. At the time of its construction in 1889, it was the tallest structure in the world, holding that title for over 40 years. This historical triumph forever secured her status as the one and only in people's minds. The myth of her eternal dominance in Paris became part of her identity. But time doesn't stand still, and cities grow not only outward but also upward. Here lies the revelation that might surprise many. For several decades now, the Eiffel Tower has not been the tallest structure in Paris. In 1973, the Montparnasse Tower surpassed it. No, not the famous skyscraper itself, but the television tower located on its roof. Yet, the real challenger to the Iron Lady is another, lesser-known structure. We're talking about the military radio mast in Pierre-sur-Haute, located in the suburbs of Paris. However, when it comes to the city itself, the title of the tallest has long been claimed by other, more modern constructions designed for television and radio broadcasting. The height of the Eiffel Tower, including the new antennas, is 330 meters. However, some television and radio towers in the Paris region exceed this height. For instance, the transmitter in Saint-Assise reaches 350 meters. So why does this myth persist? The answer lies in psychology and aesthetics. The Eiffel Tower is more than just a structure. It is a work of art, an architectural masterpiece, and a beloved symbol. Television towers and radio masts are utilitarian, devoid of elegance, engineering structures. We don't want some faceless antenna to overshadow our beauty. We emotionally refuse to acknowledge its defeat. The Eiffel Tower remains the tallest in our hearts and in the cultural landscape, even if the measuring tape tells a different story. This is a case where symbolic height proves more significant than actual height. We cling to the past greatness, not realizing how the present reshapes the world. Similarly, we believe in myths about great discoveries, forgetting that for some, these discoveries were home. Myth number 12, the lost city that was never lost. In the history of archaeology, there's a unique, romantic genre, the story of the discovery of lost cities. Picture a daring explorer from the 19th century forcing his way through impenetrable jungles. Vines cling to his clothes, the air is thick and humid, and unseen birds are calling out around him. Finally, after long weeks of travel, he emerges into a clearing and sees a wonder. Moss-covered pyramids rising to the sky, palaces consumed by vegetation. He has uncovered a city lost to time, a place that no one knew about, bringing it back from oblivion. Such a story is told about many Mayan cities, particularly the magnificent Tikal, nestled in the jungles of Guatemala. The myth suggests that in the 19th century, European and American archaeologists rediscovered this great city, which had been completely abandoned, forgotten, and reclaimed by the forest for 1,000 years. This narrative transforms archaeologists into true Indiana Joneses, and Tikal into the mysterious Atlantis of the jungle. The whole world bought into this version because it perfectly aligned with the colonial worldview of that era. Civilized Europeans stepping into wild lands and unveiling wonders created by long-gone cultures. It was a story about retrieving the past from oblivion, and it was a beautiful one. But this beautiful story is a lie. Tikal was never truly lost. Yes, it was abandoned as a major political center around the year 900 of our era. Its stone structures did become overgrown with jungle. However, it never faded from the memory of the locals. The indigenous people, descendants of the very Maya, always knew about this place. For them, it wasn't merely the ruins of a forgotten civilization. It was a sacred site linked to their ancestors. They continued to come here, performing rituals among ancient stones, knowing every path leading to the temples. In local legends and folklore, this place was called the site where the voices of spirits can be heard. When the first Europeans arrived in these lands during the 18th and 19th centuries, they did not discover Tikal. The locals simply showed them the way. The archaeologists who came later did monumental and crucial work. They cleared the ruins, conducted systematic excavations, created maps, and deciphered hieroglyphs. They introduced Tikal to Western science and the world. But they were not the true discoverers in the literal sense. They were guests in a place that had never lost its guardians. The myth of the lost city was beneficial because it diminished the role of indigenous people and glorified the achievements of Western explorers. It created an image of wild jungles devoid of anyone but heroic archaeologists. The truth is that the story of Tikal never stopped flowing. It simply ran along two parallel streams, the oral tradition of the locals and the scientific reports of Western scholars. We often create myths about the land beneath our feet, but there are even more misconceptions tied to the forces of nature that rage beneath it, threatening us with disasters. Myth number 13, the supervolcano that's in no rush to erupt. Within the realm of natural threats, a few topics provoke almost mystical dread. One of them is the Yellowstone supervolcano. In the news, in popular documentaries, and online, an apocalyptic picture is painted. Beneath the picturesque geysers and hot springs of Yellowstone National Park in the United States lies a monster, a gigantic bubble of magma poised to erupt at any moment. We are told that such an eruption would be a planetary-scale event. It would blanket half of North America in ash, trigger a volcanic winter, and result in crop failures and famine worldwide. It would be the end of civilization as we know it. This myth is fueled by constant reports of minor earthquakes in the region and changes in geyser activity. Each event is framed as a dire sign of impending disaster. Consequently, millions of people have come to believe that we are living on a powder keg, and Yellowstone is the lit fuse. Fear of the supervolcano has become a part of modern culture, symbolizing an unavoidable and uncontrollable threat from nature. But what do volcanologists, the experts who dedicate their lives to studying this giant, say? Their conclusions are far less dramatic. Yes, the Yellowstone caldera is an active volcanic system. Yes, it has erupted in the past with monstrous force, roughly 2 million, 1,300,000, and 640,000 years ago. But that doesn't mean the next eruption is imminent or will happen anytime soon. First of all, geological processes occur on a completely different timescale than human life. For a geologist, soon might mean in the next few thousand years. The probability of a supereruption at Yellowstone in any given year is approximately 1 in 730,000. That's much lower than the chance of dying from an asteroid strike. Secondly, the United States Geological Survey conducts continuous and thorough monitoring of the caldera. Dozens of sensors track even the slightest changes in seismic activity, ground deformation, and gas composition. Scientists claim that noticeable and prolonged signs must precede a supereruption, such as significant uplifting of the ground, powerful earthquakes, and sudden changes in hydrothermal activity. These indicators would build up over weeks, months, or even years, allowing time for preparation. The truth is, Yellowstone is not a ticking time bomb, but a complex geological system that operates according to its own very slow laws. The myth of an imminent explosion is far more popular than the truth because it taps into our deep fears of apocalypse. Sensationalism always sells better than calm scientific analysis. We fear what might happen, but often misinterpret even what is occurring right now, such as our planet's path through space. Myth number 14, the heavenly ellipse. Instead of a perfect circle, since childhood, we have been taught a simple and elegant image of the solar system. At the center sits the shining sun, while planets, including our Earth, orbit around it in neat, nearly perfect circular paths. This model, which we draw in school and see in cartoons and simplified diagrams, seems to embody heavenly harmony. The circle is the perfect shape, a symbol of eternity and perfection. The idea that our planet moves along such an ideal path is very appealing. It creates a sense of stability, order, and predictability in the universe. This belief in circular orbits dates back to antiquity, when philosophers considered the circle to be the most divine of shapes. Even Copernicus, who revolutionized our understanding by placing the sun at the center of the system, still believed the planets moved in circles. However, the reality revealed by the genius of Johannes Kepler in the early 17th century is less ideal but much more interesting. The Earth, like all other planets, orbits the Sun in an elliptical path rather than a circular one. This means its orbit is slightly stretched out, with the Sun located not at the center of the ellipse, but at one of its foci. As a result, the distance from the Earth to the Sun varies throughout the year. At the beginning of January, our planet reaches a point called perihelion, the closest point to the Sun in its orbit. At this time, we are about 147 million kilometers away. Then, at the start of July, the Earth reaches aphelion, the farthest point, and the distance increases to 152 million kilometers. The difference is around 5 million kilometers. This fact often surprises people, as it contradicts intuitive logic. If we are closer to the Sun in January, why is it winter in the northern hemisphere? The answer is simple. The changing of the seasons is not caused by the distance to the Sun, but rather by the tilt of the Earth's axis. During winter, the northern hemisphere is simply turned away from the Sun, receiving its rays at a sharper angle. The myth of the perfect circle persists because it is easy to understand and teach. An ellipse, with its foci and eccentricity, is a more complex concept. But the truth is, it is this imperfect elliptical orbit that influences many nuances of our climate and movement in space. The universe seems to prefer elegant curves over simple circles. We tend to think that the most fascinating events happen on the surface of our planet, but what if the most grand processes are hidden beneath the ocean's depths? Myth number 15, the fiery heart of the ocean. When we think of volcanoes, familiar images come to mind. A smoking mountain, like Etna or Fuji, erupting streams of molten lava and columns of ash. In our perception, volcanoes are strictly terrestrial phenomena. They rise above plains, form islands, and threaten cities at their feet. Some of the most famous eruptions in history, Vesuvius, Krakatoa, Mount St. Helens, have occurred on land. This image is so commonplace that the idea of volcanoes existing elsewhere seems strange. We associate fire with land, not with water. The belief that volcanic activity is primarily a land phenomenon has taken a strong hold. We envision the ocean as a realm of water, cold, and pressure, where fire has no place. But when you descend to the depths of the world's oceans, this picture is turned upside down. The truth is that the vast majority of volcanoes on our planet are underwater. About 75% of all volcanic activity on Earth occurs on the ocean floor, hidden from our sight. The most monumental volcanic structure on the planet is not the Andes or Himalayas, but the mid-ocean ridges. This massive network of underwater mountain chains spans over 60,000 kilometers, encircling the globe like a seam on a baseball. It is here, at the boundaries of tectonic plates, that the Earth's crust is constantly drifting apart, releasing vast amounts of magma from below to the surface. These underwater eruptions are not as spectacular as those on land. The immense pressure of the water prevents gases from erupting explosively, and lava rapidly solidifies upon contact with cold water, forming distinctive pillow structures. However, in terms of scale, these processes far exceed anything we observe on land. This is where new oceanic crust is born, and these processes are what drive the continent's movement. The myth of land volcanoes exists because the underwater world is hidden from our view. We only see the tip of the iceberg, the few volcanoes that have managed to break through the water's surface and become islands. The true fiery heart of our planet beats in the dark and cold depths of the ocean. There is so much we don't know about the world around us, but even more myths surround the world within us and our own bodies. Myth number 16, the Sahara and its hot competitors. Ask anyone what the hottest place on Earth is, and you will almost certainly hear the answer: the Sahara Desert. This image has firmly taken root in the public consciousness. Endless sandy dunes, scorched under a blazing sun, exhausting heat, and mirages on the horizon. The Sahara has become synonymous with heat, the absolute extreme of temperature on our planet. This myth is supported by its vast size and its status as the largest hot desert in the world. It seems logical that the largest should also be the most extreme. In books, movies, and even some geography references, the Sahara is often mentioned as the place with the highest recorded air temperatures. This belief is simple and convenient. There is one champion place and everyone knows it. However, when meteorologists and climatologists began using modern technologies, particularly satellite monitoring of surface temperatures, the picture became more complex. The official record for the highest air temperature recorded at a weather station did indeed belong to a location on the edge of the Sahara in Libya for a long time, but it was later disputed due to measurement inaccuracies. However, if we consider not air temperature, but the temperature of the land surface itself, the Sahara often falls short of other less well-known deserts. Satellite data shows that the highest surface temperatures are regularly recorded in the Lut Desert in Iran and in some areas of Australian deserts. In these places, surfaces made of dark volcanic sand or rocks can reach astonishing values, exceeding 70 and sometimes even 80 degrees Celsius. This is significantly hotter than the sands of the Sahara. So why does the myth of the Sahara persist? First, due to its exposure and vastness. Second, because of the confusion between air temperature, which is measured in the shade at standard height, and surface temperature, which is always higher. Third, many of the hottest places on the planet are remote and uninhabited areas without weather stations, and only satellites can capture their extreme conditions. The truth is that there are several hotspots on Earth competing for the title of the hottest place, and the Sahara is just one of them, and not always the winner. Our planet is full of extreme places, but equally extreme can be the misconceptions about our own bodies, such as the belief in the necessity of cleansing from mythical toxins. Myth number 17. The Great Detox Deception and Non-Existent Toxins. In today's world, obsessed with health and purity, one word stands out like a magic spell: detox. We are constantly told that our bodies are polluted with toxins that accumulate due to poor ecology, unhealthy diets, and stress. These mysterious toxins, as explained to us, poison us from within, causing fatigue, illness, and weight gain. To combat these toxins, a whole arsenal of products is offered: detox juices, special diets, teas, patches supposedly pulling dirt from our feet, and expensive treatments at clinics. The idea of cleansing from toxins has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. Millions of people believe in it because the concept is simple and easy to understand. It works like a clogged pipe. If there's dirt in the body, it needs to be cleaned out. This provides an illusion of control over our health and promises a quick solution to all problems. The image of a toxic body has become a powerful marketing tool. However, if we look into the archives of medical science, we find something surprising. There is no scientific concept of toxins in the context of the human body. It is a pseudo-medical term borrowed from metallurgy, where slag refers to production waste. Doctors and biologists never use this word. Our bodies have their own incredibly effective and complex detoxification system that works 24 hours a day. The main organs of this system are the liver and kidneys. The liver is a powerful chemical laboratory that converts potentially harmful substances into water-soluble compounds. Meanwhile, the kidneys, like a fine filter, eliminate these metabolic byproducts through urine. Additionally, the lungs, skin, and intestines also participate in this process. This system performs its function perfectly without any celery smoothies or activated charcoal. When detox advocates are asked to name specific toxins they claim to eliminate, they either can't provide a clear answer or list ordinary metabolic products that the body already removes. The truth is that the detox industry sells us a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. The only thing it truly cleanses is our wallets. The myth of toxins is so popular because it plays on our guilt about unhealthy lifestyles and offers a simple, albeit false, redemption. We are so quick to believe in fabricated problems with our bodies that we are willing to resort to other questionable, sometimes dangerous, methods born out of sheer ignorance. Myth number 18. Candle heat that doesn't heal. Among folk and alternative treatment methods, there are procedures that seem mysterious and even mystical. One such method is ear candles, or ear cones. The ritual looks impressive. A person lies down on their side, while a hollow tube made of wax and fabric is inserted into their ear, and the upper end is lit. Sellers and believers of this method claim that the burning candle creates a chimney effect. The flame pulls out earwax, dirt, and even toxins from the ear. After the procedure, they proudly show off the contents of the leftover candle stub, dark powder and waxy chunks, proclaiming, "Look, This was all in your head. This visual result convinces many people. The myth that ear candles are an effective and safe ear cleaning method is passed down from person to person. People believe in it because the procedure seems natural, it uses wax and herbs, and promises relief from the problem without a doctor's visit. The visual effect of pulled-out dirt becomes undeniable evidence. But what really happens? Science and medicine completely debunk this myth, calling it not only useless but also dangerous. First, let's talk about the physics of the process. Studies have shown that a burning ear candle does not create any vacuum or negative pressure strong enough to pull even a tiny piece of wax from the ear canal. The so-called chimney effect is pure fiction. Second, the debris that remains in the candle after the procedure is not earwax. Analysis of this residue has shown that it consists solely of the combustion products of the candle itself, wax and fabric ash. The same result occurs if you burn a candle simply by placing it in a glass, without any ear at all. This means that the manufacturers of this miracle product are deceiving their customers by passing off the remnants of their own product as cleaned debris. But most importantly, there is the danger of the procedure. Doctors around the world regularly encounter the consequences of using ear candles: burns to the ear, face, and hair, blockage of the ear canal by melted wax, requiring serious medical intervention, and even perforation of the eardrum. The truth is that ear candles are a classic example of quackery based on visual deception and scientific ignorance. The myth has survived due to its theatricality and apparent simplicity. People prefer to believe in a magical ritual rather than in boring but safe doctor recommendations. Now, let's move from myths about treatments to a food myth that was born not by accident but with cold calculation, in the smoke of war. Myth number 19. The carrot conspiracy and night vision. There are facts about food that we absorb from a very early age. One of them goes like this: eat carrots and you'll have good vision, especially at night. This simple wisdom is passed down from parents to children, repeated in schools and printed in health magazines. Carrots, thanks to their high beta-carotene content, which converts to vitamin A in the body, have become the main vitamin for the eyes. The idea that you can improve your eyesight by simply munching on an orange root vegetable is very enticing. This myth has become so popular that many people sincerely believe that eating a lot of carrots can give them a kind of superpower, the ability to see in the dark, like a cat. This belief seems harmless and even beneficial, as it encourages people to eat vegetables. However, the origins of this myth have nothing to do with nutrition. It was born during World War II as part of a clever British military propaganda campaign. In 1940, the Royal Air Force began successfully shooting down German bombers during nighttime raids. This was unexpected, as aerial combat at night had previously been very challenging. The secret to their success lay in a new, top-secret technology, onboard radar, which allowed pilots to see enemy planes in complete darkness. To conceal this revolutionary technology from the enemy, the British Ministry of Information launched a disinformation campaign. Stories about top ace pilots like John Cunningham, nicknamed Cat's Eye, began appearing in newspapers and on the radio. It was claimed that their incredible accuracy in nighttime battles was due to a special diet rich in carrots. Posters circulated with slogans like, "Carrots keep you healthy and help you see in a darkened city." This narrative was embraced by the civilian population, which was suffering from food shortages. Carrots were one of the few vegetables in abundance, and the government encouraged their consumption. Thus, a military trick turned into folk wisdom. Of course, vitamin A is indeed essential for eye health, and a severe deficiency can lead to night blindness, but overindulging in carrots won't grant you superhuman night vision. The myth has proven remarkably resilient because it is simple, plausible, and actively promoted by the state. The truth is, behind this seemingly harmless advice lies a story of espionage, high technology, and one of the most successful propaganda operations in history. We believe in myths about our bodies, but what if we're mistaken about the most inevitable process of our lives: aging? Myth number 20. When old age becomes a disease. In our society, there is a deeply rooted belief about aging. We tend to think that serious memory deterioration, disorientation, and the inability to recognize loved ones are, though sad, normal and almost unavoidable companions of old age. When we hear about an elderly person exhibiting these symptoms, it's common to hear the phrase, "What do you expect? It's age." Alzheimer's disease, the most common cause of dementia, is often perceived not as a specific illness, but as a severe manifestation of aging, the final stage of the natural decline of the mind. This myth is convenient as it dulls the urgency of the issue. If it's normal, then there's nothing to be done. One must simply come to terms with it. It fosters a fatalistic attitude toward one of the most frightening ailments of our time. The belief that severe dementia is a normal part of aging paralyzes the will and diminishes the desire to fight back and seek help. But medical science firmly asserts Alzheimer's disease is not normal. It is a pathological condition, just like cancer or diabetes. Yes, age is the main risk factor. The older a person gets, the higher the likelihood of developing the disease. However, age is just a risk factor, not a cause. Just as smoking is a risk factor for lung cancer, but not every smoker develops cancer. Normal, healthy aging can indeed come with some cognitive slowing or difficulties in remembering new information. But this has nothing to do with the total destruction of identity that occurs with Alzheimer's disease. This condition is caused by specific pathological processes in the brain, the accumulation of amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles, which lead to the death of nerve cells. It is a disease that can and should be diagnosed, and while there is currently no complete cure, there are methods available to slow its progression and improve the quality of life for patients. The myth of Alzheimer's being normal is incredibly harmful. It leads people to seek help late, dismissing early warning signs as mere normal forgetfulness. It breeds stigmatization and a sense of hopelessness. The truth is that we must distinguish between natural age-related changes and serious illness. Understanding that Alzheimer's disease is an enemy to be fought against, rather than an unavoidable fate, is the first step towards changing societal attitudes on this issue. We have explored myths about the body and mind, but there is another area filled with misconceptions: the world of superstitions and mystical signs that people have believed in for centuries. Myth number 21. The silence of a fallen icon. In a world where science could not yet explain everything, people sought signs and omens in every event. Even today, in the age of technology, many of these ancient superstitions continue to thrive in our homes. One of the most common and frightening relates to icons. It is believed that if an icon falls in a home, it is a very bad sign. It heralds misfortune, serious illness, or even the departure of a loved one. This myth is passed down through generations, especially in folk circles. When an icon falls, people experience a sense of anxiety, almost panic. They begin to seek hidden meanings, trying to understand what their higher power is warning them about. This superstition has taken root so deeply because it taps into the most powerful human emotions, the fear of the unknown and loss. For a believer, an icon is not just a picture. It is a window into the spiritual world, a sacred object. Its fall is perceived as a disruption of harmony, a sign of divine wrath, or a warning of impending trouble. However, if we look at the official position of the Church, for example, the Orthodox Church, we will find a very different interpretation. Clergy unanimously assert that attributing a mystical or prophetic meaning to the falling of an icon is indeed superstition, considered a vain, empty belief that is condemned by the Church. From a theological perspective, the fall of an icon is merely an everyday occurrence. Perhaps the nail it was hanging from became loose. Maybe it was accidentally bumped during cleaning. Or it could have slipped off the shelf due to vibrations in the house. The Church urges us to view this event not with fear, but with reverence, and a recognition of our own negligence towards the sacred. An icon that has fallen should be picked up, cleaned, kissed, and placed back in its spot, possibly secured more firmly. If a believer feels anxious about this, they are advised to go to the church, pray, and confess, rather than searching for hidden signs and descending into panic. The truth is, this superstition is rooted in a folk worldview that is pagan in nature, where every object could be a carrier of magical power and omens. Christianity teaches us to turn to God directly through prayer, rather than interpreting random events. Myths often prove more resilient than common sense and church teachings because fear is a powerful emotion, and searching for hidden signs provides an illusion of understanding the future. From one mundane superstition, let's transition to another, equally prevalent one, related to our own reflection. Myth number 22. The doppelganger in the mirror and the fear of the lens. Mirrors have always been objects of mystical awe. Their ability to create an exact copy of reality, to double the world, seemed like magic. This sense of wonder led to a multitude of superstitions. One such superstition, which gained new life with the advent of photography, states, "One should not take pictures in a mirror or in front of a mirror. The consequences, according to the belief, can be dire. From minor mishaps and illnesses to loss of life energy and even a splitting of the soul." This myth is particularly popular in esoteric circles and among superstitious individuals. Various arguments are presented. Mirrors are portals to the otherworldly, and a photograph can capture entities from that realm. A flash reflected in a mirror produces some sort of energetic jolt. By photographing their reflection, a person locks a part of their soul in that dual image. This belief is reinforced by chilling stories of unfortunate photographs that supposedly display strange shadows or distorted faces. But where does this fear actually originate? Historically, mirrors were expensive and rare items, accessible only to the nobility. Their shiny, enigmatic surface fueled beliefs that they could steal your soul or reveal the future. Mirrors were seen as windows into the spirit world. With the emergence of photography in the 19th century, this ancient fear simply transferred onto a new technology. Photography, which also seemed magical, a freeze in time and copying of a person, when combined with a mirror, created a double mystical effect. The notion that one should not take photographs in a mirror emerged from a merge of fears regarding unfamiliar technologies: old, the mirror, and new, photography. The belief in the doubling of the soul and its vulnerability in that moment became central. In reality, from the standpoint of physics and common sense, photographing in a mirror is simply capturing reflected light. No portal or energy surge is actually happening. Anomalies in images are usually explained by optical illusions, film defects, the play of light and shadow, or simply our tendency to see faces and shapes in random patterns. The myth remains resilient because it appeals to our subconscious, primal fear of our own doppelganger or mirror image. This fear is skillfully exploited by culture and mysticism. We fear what may happen to us after an image is created, but even more superstitions are linked to what remains after we leave this world. Myth number 23. An empty pillow and a restless soul. Funeral rites and traditions across cultures are deeply symbolic and often filled with superstitions. They are meant to assist the living in mourning the deceased and to ensure peace for the departed soul. In Slavic folklore, there is a strong belief regarding the deceased's pillow. It states that the pillow upon which the deceased laid must never be left in its place. It should be removed, turned over, or even burned. If the pillow stays put, it is believed that the soul of the departed cannot leave and will return to its spot. This return is seen not as a joyful event, but rather as something frightening and wrong. It is believed that the soul will suffer, unable to find peace, and may disturb the living. This custom is still observed in many families, especially in rural areas, and breaking this tradition is considered a great risk. The belief in this superstition is rooted in ancient ideas of the soul as something almost material that can attach to the objects a person used during their life, particularly to the bed where they spent their final hours. But what is the real origin of this custom? It traces back to pre-Christian pagan beliefs about the world of the living and the world of the dead. In these beliefs, the boundary between worlds was thin, and the soul that left the body could easily get lost or get stuck on familiar objects. The bed, and especially the pillow, where the head, the vessel of the mind and soul, connected with the material world, was seen as a particularly powerful anchor. The custom of removing or turning over the pillow was a symbolic act intended to help the soul detach from the earthly realm and journey to the afterlife. It was a way to sever the last connection, to show the soul that its place here was empty and that it was time to leave. With the advent of Christianity, many pagan rituals were either supplanted or reinterpreted, but some, especially those related to birth and death, have continued to exist in folk culture as superstitions. From a practical standpoint, cleaning the bed of the deceased also had hygienic implications, particularly if the person died from an infectious disease. However, the mystical explanation proved to be far more enduring. The truth is that this custom is not a means of protecting against a ghost's return, but rather an ancient ritual, a psychological gesture that helps the living accept the reality of loss and symbolically conclude the earthly journey of a loved one. Let's move from quiet superstitions at home to louder and more ominous signs that are believed to knock on our door. Myth number 24. 3 knocks and the breath of death. Some sounds make our hearts stop. One of the most sinister in folklore is the sound of 3 knocks on a door or window, especially if they occur at night and there's no one outside. This superstition exists in many cultures around the world. It is believed that 3 knocks signal the arrival of death itself, come to take someone from the household. It is strictly forbidden to open the door to such a sound. This myth has become a part of folklore, urban legends, and horror films. It's so powerful that even a non-superstitious person would feel a primal fear upon hearing 3 mysterious knocks in the night. The belief in this omen is fueled by our fear of death and the unknown. The number 3 holds sacred, or conversely, ominous meaning in many cultures, and knocking on the door symbolizes the arrival of a guest, in this case, an uninvited and final one. But where did this enduring association come from? It doesn't originate from a single source. Rather, it is a blend of several cultural threads. In some Christian traditions, the number 3 is associated with the Holy Trinity, but in folklore, it often takes on a darker, demonic connotation. For instance, spitting over one's shoulder 3 times. In certain funeral rituals of the past, it was customary to knock a coffin 3 times against the threshold before carrying it out, symbolic farewells. Perhaps this ritual gave rise to the opposite association. If someone knocks from outside, it means they have come to take someone away. Moreover, 3 knocks are a rhythmically complete and persistent action that sounds particularly unsettling in the silence of the night. Psychologically, we perceive it as intentional and inevitable. Of course, most mysterious knocks have mundane explanations: a branch hitting the wall, thermal expansion of materials in the house, animals, or even a prank. But the human brain is wired to seek supernatural explanations in times of anxiety. The myth of 3 knocks of death is a perfect example of how we create monsters from random sounds, projecting our deepest fears onto them. The truth is that it is not death knocking at the door, but our own fear knocking at our consciousness. We have explored myths born in ancient times, but even more recent eras, up to the 20th century, have given rise to misconceptions that we accept as historical facts. Myth number 25. The empire where the sun never set. The empire on which the sun never sets. This proud and grand phrase is firmly associated in our minds with one state, the British Empire during its peak in the 19th century. It seems that it was the English, ruling colonies on every continent from Canada to Australia and from India to South Africa, who coined this slogan to highlight their global power. This phrase has become a symbol of the Victorian era, representing British dominance on both land and sea. It's quoted in textbooks, featured in historical films, and seems to capture the imperial spirit of Great Britain. Millions around the world believe that this famous expression originated solely with the British. However, historical archives reveal that the British were not the first to proudly proclaim these words. They borrowed and popularized an idea that originated 3 centuries earlier in another powerful empire. The first similar expression was associated with the Spanish Empire in the 16th century during the reign of King Charles V, who was also the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. His vast territories spanned Europe and included enormous colonies in America, making it fair to say that in some part of his empire, the sun was always shining. One of his courtiers wrote to the king about a world where the sun never sets. Later, under his son Philip II, when Spain added Portugal and its colonies, this phrase became even more relevant and commonplace. Thus, the true authors of the concept of an empire on which the sun never sets were the Spanish, not the English. The British only adopted this beautiful and powerful image in the 19th century, when their own empire expanded to such size that the phrase once again held geographical truth. The myth of British authorship emerged because it was during the Victorian era that this idea gained the most cultural traction and became part of Britain's global image. History often remembers not the one who spoke first, but the one who spoke louder and at the right moment. We easily misattribute quotes, but we even more readily believe in the historical accuracy of films, especially when they're made on a Hollywood scale. Myth number 26. The Colosseum of Lies in the film Gladiator. The film Gladiator, directed by Ridley Scott and released in 2001, became a true cultural phenomenon. It revived interest in the peplum genre and created a vivid, seemingly accurate representation of ancient Rome in the minds of millions. We witnessed brutal gladiatorial fights, cunning intrigues within the Senate, the Grand Colosseum, and the tragic story of General Maximus. The film won numerous awards, including the Oscar for Best Picture, and many viewers regarded it not just as a work of art, but almost as a historical reconstruction. The portrayals by Russell Crowe and Joaquin Phoenix felt so convincing that they became benchmarks for many people's visions of a Roman warrior and emperor. The belief in the historical accuracy of Gladiator was so strong that many facts from the film began to be perceived as real events. However, from a historian's perspective, Gladiator is more a fantasy about Rome than an accurate reflection of its history. The film is filled with historical inaccuracies and outright fabrications. Let's start with the main point. Emperor Commodus did not kill his father, the great philosopher on the throne, Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius died of the plague during a military campaign. While it is true that Commodus was not the best ruler and enjoyed performing as a gladiator, shocking the Roman elite, he was not the psychopathic villain depicted in the movie. He did not meet his end in the Colosseum at the hands of the fictional General Maximus. He was actually strangled in his bedroom by an athlete named Narcissus as part of a conspiracy. The character of Maximus is entirely fictional. Gladiators did exist in Rome, but they were not noble heroes fighting for freedom. Most were slaves, prisoners of war, or criminals whose lives were considered of little value. Although some did achieve fame, their social status remained extremely low. The idea that a gladiator could challenge an emperor and rally the people behind him is completely unthinkable in Roman society. The Colosseum is depicted in the film as a place for the political execution of senators, which is also inaccurate. Other, less public methods existed for such purposes. The myth of the historical authenticity of Gladiator was born from the talent of its creators. They wove such a powerful and emotionally convincing narrative that audiences wanted to believe in its truth. Artistic truth once again proves stronger than historical fact. We often distort events of ancient history, but even relatively recent and pivotal moments in European history are surrounded by an equal number of myths. Myth number 27. A blind arrow that changed the fate of England. The Battle of Hastings in 1066 was a pivotal moment in English history. In this battle, the army of the Norman Duke William the Conqueror defeated the Anglo-Saxons led by King Harold Godwinson, forever altering the language, culture, and political structure of the country. At the center of this epic battle is one dramatic, almost mythological moment, the death of King Harold. The most well-known version, found in many textbooks and historical novels, states that Harold was killed by a random Norman arrow that struck him directly in the eye. This image, of a king struck in the center of his vision, has become a symbol of tragic fate and inescapable destiny. The picture seems complete. The seeing king, leading his people, is blinded by the invader's arrow, and with him, all of England goes blind and falls. This version is so cinematic and symbolic that it has become almost official. However, if we turn to primary sources, we see that the story of the arrow in the eye is just one of several versions, and not the most credible one. The main visual evidence of the battle is the famous Bayeux Tapestry, a 70-meter-long embroidered cloth created shortly after the events. It does indeed depict a scene of Harold's death. Above the figure, with the words, "Here King Harold was killed," there is a warrior with an arrow in his head. However, next to him is another warrior, struck down by a Norman knight's sword. Historians still debate which of these figures represents Harold. It's quite possible that the tapestry depicts both versions of his death that existed at the time. Other written sources, such as the Chronicle, the Song of the Battle of Hastings, written shortly after the battle, claim Harold was slain by a group of Norman knights who broke through to his banner. This version seems more plausible from a military perspective. While death by an errant arrow is certainly possible, a leader falling in hand-to-hand combat at the center of the battle is a much more typical scenario for a medieval conflict. So why did the arrow version become so popular? Likely due to its dramatic and symbolic nature. It transformed a chaotic struggle into a tragedy involving blind fate. Later chroniclers, especially those sympathetic to the Normans, may have promoted this version to suggest that Harold's death was more of divine judgment than a result of specific knights' valor. In any case, we are faced with a historical mystery, where a beautiful legend has nearly completely overshadowed more mundane, yet possibly more truthful accounts. We often misinterpret events, but even more frequently, we misquote words that we believe shaped entire eras. Myth number 28. The German roots of a global slogan. Workers of the world, unite! This rallying cry is familiar to anyone who has studied 20th century history, resonating through demonstrations, printed on the emblems of Soviet republics, and gracing the front pages of the newspaper Pravda. This phrase became the battle cry of the communist movement worldwide, a symbol of international solidarity among workers. In the minds of millions, it is inseparably linked to Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, seen as their original Russian-sounding slogan that they gifted to the global proletariat. It seems that within these words, in their Russian version, lies all the energy and power of the revolutionary idea. We are so accustomed to this phrasing that it seems like the true source. However, as is often the case with famous quotes, we are dealing with a translation that has taken on a life of its own. The original slogan, found at the end of the Communist Manifesto, written by Marx and Engels in 1848, is, of course, in German. Proletarier aller Länder, vereinigt euch. The famous Russian version is just one of many translations. Interestingly, it's not the most accurate translation. The German term, vereinigt euch, is a command form of a reflexive verb, which would more precisely translate to unite or band together. The word join, used in the classic Russian translation, has a slightly different connotation, potentially more mechanical. Yet it is this version, due to its brevity and power, that has taken hold and become canonical in the Russian-speaking world. Moreover, the slogan itself was not invented from scratch by Marx and Engels. They borrowed and reinterpreted it from an earlier socialist organization called the League of the Just, which proclaimed, "All men are brothers." Marx found this slogan too vague and proposed replacing it with a more class-conscious and militant call to action. Therefore, the famous phrase is the result of evolution, adaptation, and, ultimately, a brilliant translation that became more recognized in Russia than the original. This myth of the originality of the Russian slogan illustrates how language and culture can appropriate and adapt ideas, giving them a new national resonance. Now, let's move from ideological myths to social and economic myths that have shaped our understanding of entire nations. Myth number 29. Private property in the Soviet Union. One of the most enduring myths about the Soviet Union, which still persists in the minds of many both in the post-Soviet space and in the West, is the idea that there was no private property whatsoever in the USSR and that everything belonged to the state. The picture painted is a monolithic one. Factories, industries, land, and houses all were under the control of a faceless Leviathan state. Private initiative was completely eradicated, and any hint of entrepreneurship was severely punished. This image of total nationalization of the economy became the hallmark of the Soviet system, its main distinction from the capitalist world. This belief was reinforced by official ideology, which proclaimed communal ownership of the means of production. However, the real economic history of the USSR was far more complex and diverse than this simplified black-and-white myth. The complete absence of non-state ownership is a fiction. Throughout nearly all of Soviet history, there existed forms of ownership that were not state-owned. The most vivid example is the collective farms, or kolkhozes. Formally, the land they worked on belonged to the state, but everything else, equipment, livestock, buildings, and produced goods, was considered cooperative property belonging to the collective of peasants. Additionally, each kolkhoz worker was entitled to a personal subsidiary farm, a small plot of land, a cow, pigs, and poultry. They could sell the produce from these farms in the market. During certain periods, these personal farms contributed significantly to the country's total agricultural output. Another form of non-state ownership was production cooperatives, which were particularly prevalent until the late 50s. These cooperatives produced a wide range of consumer goods: furniture, clothing, dishes, and toys. Some of them were quite large and successful enterprises. And, of course, we cannot forget the period of the New Economic Policy, NEP, in the 20s, when private trade and small-scale private production were legalized. During this time, private shops, restaurants, and workshops flourished. Yes, later on, all forms of non-state activity were significantly restricted or eliminated, but they did exist. The myth of complete state ownership served both Soviet propaganda, showcasing the system's monolithicity, and anti-Soviet narratives, highlighting its inflexibility and totalitarianism. The truth is that the Soviet economy was a hybrid and constantly evolving system where there was always room for pockets of non-state initiative. We often misunderstand entire systems, but just as many myths surround the social norms we attribute to other eras, such as Victorian England. Myth number 30. Victorian Innocence and the 12-Year Lie. The Victorian era in England from 1837 to 1901 is often perceived as a time of strict morality, prudishness, and suppressed sexuality. However, alongside this, there exists a darker myth that is frequently used to illustrate the hypocrisy and depravity of this period. The myth claims that in Victorian England, the age of sexual consent was only 12 or 13 years old, and this was seen as a social norm. But this story, like many others, is a gross simplification and distortion of reality. Indeed, at the beginning of the Victorian era, English law in this area was archaic, and the common law age of consent was 12. However, to label this as a quote-unquote social norm is a significant mistake. Victorian society was far from uniform, and by the mid-19th century, a powerful movement for social reform and child protection was gaining momentum. Many public figures, journalists, and philanthropists were actively fighting against child exploitation and prostitution. The climax of this struggle was the famous campaign led by journalist William Stead, who in 1885 published a series of sensational articles titled "The Maiden Tribute of Modern Babylon," exposing the horrors of child prostitution in London. This campaign stirred enormous public response and led to Parliament passing the Criminal Law Amendment Act the same year, raising the age of consent from 13 to 16. Therefore, the claim that a low age of consent was considered a norm for the entire Victorian era is false. This was an issue society actively addressed and ultimately resolved through legislation. The myth of a norm persists because it offers a simple and shocking narrative that fits well into our image of the dark and hypocritical Victorian age. The reality, as always, is more complex. It was a story not of accepting a horrifying norm, but of society's struggle against it. It's a tale of awakening conscience and the triumph of humanism, which often remains overshadowed by more scandalous and oversimplified myths. And this is perhaps the most important lesson taught by forgotten archives. Truth is seldom straightforward, but it always turns out to be much deeper and more insightful than any myth, no matter how captivating.